Okay, with that, it is now 3:07, and I'm calling the sixth meeting of the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board to order. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. If you'd like to ask a question or give comment, please use the raise hand function. We also ask that you turn on your cameras so that your name appears when you speak. Please feel free to cover the camera on your device if you do not want to appear on the actual screen. Also, if you have not returned your conflict of interest form at this time, you are not permitted to participate in any motions or votes today. With that, Julie, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. Gordon, can you go to the next slide, please? Is the representative of the Councilman LaBelle's office present?
Present.
Is the representative from the Hill CDC present?
Present.
Is the representative from the Hill District Federal Credit Union present?
Present.
Is the representative from the Hill District Consensus Group present? Is the representative from the Wesley Center AME Zion Church present? Mr. Grayson, did I see you join? Is the representative from the Shenley Heights Community Development Program present?
Present.
Is the representative from the Historic Hill Institute present? Is the representative from Ujamaa Collective present? Is the representative of the Office of State Representative Jake Wheatley present? Is the representative of the Office of County Executive Fitzgerald present? Is the representative of the Office of the Mayor present?
Present.
Is the representative of the Pittsburgh Public School District present? Is the representative of Allegheny County Council present? All right, thank you so much.
So I believe we do not have a voting quorum, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we'll address that when we get to the end of the meeting. Next, just as a reminder, these meetings are being recorded and posted on the URA's website, and that then serves as our meeting minutes. So anyone can actually go review this if you want to review the minutes or the actual business of the meeting. With that, that'll move us on to old business, which is dealing with our meeting schedule. The next Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board meeting will be held the week of June 27th with the target date and time of Thursday, June 30th at 3 p.m. We do not have a quorum, therefore we can't make a motion for this to be formally approved. If we have quorum, we'll come back to this. If not, then I forget what our rules state, whether or not we can do it, if we can send it out for approval.
I'll double check the guidelines. I believe the answer is yes.
That was what I was thinking, but let's double check. So with that, we'll actually move on to new business, which is to discuss the allocation plans themselves. Just so everyone's aware, at the direction of the co-chairs, both myself and Ms. Malyans, the URA created indistinguishable slides from the 4 received allocation plans. The Hill CDC's plan that they did in in collaboration, excuse me, with the Hill District community, the URA model that I asked the URA to put together, RB Bankston's submission that he provided, as well as Dr. Ellis's submission that she also provided. And we have with us today James Reed, who is going to walk us through sort of the methodology that he used to generate the charts. And then we're going to discuss the actual allocation plans themselves. It was our hope that we could vote on one and move this piece forward today, but that'll be determined based upon quorum and how people feel once we go through it. With that, I'll turn it over to James.
Thank you, Councilman. Good afternoon, everyone. And For those who don't know me, my name is James Reed. I'm the manager of strategic initiatives and business growth strategies here at the URA. I have worked together with URA staff to really put together some options for the allocation plans in order to, kind of make it easy to weigh the different allocation plans that came in. What we did was we started in terms of our methodology of just, kind of reviewing the different plans that came in. We cleaned up the data where necessary to correct for, any particular errors that may have been present. Then we reorganized each allocation plan so that we could easily read them across plans. And so really what that consisted of was just making sure that the right categories lined up across all of the different plans. And then where there were instances where certain categories or certain line items were grouped together into a larger percentage, those were split, and that split was divided evenly among those line items. So there was no weighting on any particular line item. And then after that work was done, the options were quasi-randomized and then assigned an A, B, C, or D code. This is to give the advisory board the opportunity to weigh and evaluate each option without knowing who put forth that particular option. And then what you will see on the last slide as we go through this is just a summary describing the range, showing the range of allocation for each particular line item, as well as an average. And so that is really for summary and informative purposes. And then the last item to address on this slide, one additional step that will need to be done is that, we will need to set each allocation plan, or the final allocation plan rather, to 100% to ensure that we're accounting for all of the funds. As you'll note when we go through these allocation plans, they range from 80% of funds being allocated on the minimum side to 120% being allocated on the maximum side. And so in order to make sure we're accounting for the correct amount of funding, we will need to adjust that to 100%. Next slide. And this first option A, let's see. As you can see, the key eligible use categories are on the left-hand side of the screen, starting with administration, children and youth education initiatives, rent assistance subsidies, mortgage assistance subsidies, job placement programs, workforce development initiatives, project development, MWBE development initiatives, MWBE business counseling initiatives, historic hill institutional preservation, reoccurring revenue initiatives under community control, and other wealth building initiatives. So these are the individual line items, and this is how they are displayed in each of the options. This is the order in which they're displayed in each of the options that we'll be going through today. To note here on option A, the minimums that were identified are in this next column, and then a maximum is in the following column. If folks are able to see this screen, I would rather rely on your ability to look at the screen and the numbers than actually read everything out. But if there is anything, any particular line item that anyone would like me to highlight, please, let me know.
Excuse me, this is Alicia George. I have a couple quick questions here, a couple things I haven't seen on here before. Other wealth building initiatives, what does that pertain to?
That is a really good question. And I think at the end of the day, it is things that have not quite been identified at this particular point in time, but have been, and so a bucket has been put together for other wealth building initiatives, and that would be things that exist outside of some of these other items that might be listed as potentially wealth building. So thinking about, in particular, MWBE development initiatives, there could be a component of that that is wealth building in terms of, you know, if it is a development initiative and a business owner is taking that under control, or a real estate developer is doing the project and then holding on to the finished property for some time, that would be an example of one type of wealth building initiative. Unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, there has not been a specific articulation of what other wealth building initiatives would happen to be. And if I can posit a rationale as to why, I think it was in order to allow potential for some creativity along that when applications may be you know, sent out for projects.
In that same vein, what is reoccurring revenue initiatives? What is under community control? These are new areas I have not seen, so can you define that?
So the best way to describe that would be with, you know, starting with the reoccurring revenue. The conversations that I had heard previous were that there were some instances where there was a desire, rather, to see some of this money have a return, and so that would be initiatives. Oh, and I'm seeing in the chat a
This
description.
is, sorry, James, to interrupt.
Yep.
This comes from the guidelines for this fund in Exhibit D. Ms. George, if you want to pull that up to see, but I put it into the chat. Hopefully you can see it there. But this is how the guidelines define recurring revenue initiatives under community control.
Thank you very much. I am reading that in the chat. Thank you.
No problem. And can you remind me what the other item you asked about?
I asked about the previous one was other wealth building initiatives.
Okay, let me take a look. If I find something, I'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you very much.
I just want to have the record reflect that we've also been joined by Reverend Grayson, which means we do have a quorum of voting members.
Are there any questions related to the specific percentages aligned with any given line item?
I do, but I'll wait for the other options to be presented.
Okay. With that said, we can move on to option B. Thank you. And actually, can we go back to option A? I do want to highlight one item. So if you, in option A, the largest percentage in this allocation would be devoted to development initiatives, and that is a 40% at the minimum and a 50% at the maximum. Okay, going to the next slide. Thank you. And of note here, the largest driver of funds here would be reoccurring revenue initiatives under community control, which would be in the range of 58% to 66%. Then I'll pause for a few moments to let folks take a look at the screen to see the distribution of other percentages.
I have a question. I don't know how to use the raise your hand feature on this thing. So sorry about that. But I have a question.
Yes.
And this is overall in general. You have two columns here, one minimum percentage, the other maximum percentage, and the maximum percentage is over 100%. So that surplus, is that, where does that come from? If, if you're at 100% of the allocation. And also these percentages, are they percentages of the overall total over a time? Over the many years that this fund would be in place, or what does these percentages represent? What time period?
So these percentages represent, my understanding is that the preference is to have an allocation that accounts for the entire sort of timeline, noting if, someone on the URA team, correct me if I'm wrong, but noting that there may be the opportunity to adjust the allocation plan based on the activities that happen in a given calendar year. And so I guess the way that you could look at this effectively is that these can be set as an annual allocation plan. However, my initial understanding was that this would be, an allocation plan set for the duration of the fund, subject to evaluation on activities and adjustment, potential adjustment on an annual basis. And then as to your question regarding the 118%, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, whichever option is chosen, so if a maximum, for example, if option B were chosen and it was decided that it was determined to go with all of the maximum percentage, there would need to be further discussion to then adjust that to 100%, because as you noted, there is no surplus. We have 100%, not more. Does that answer your questions, Mr. Witherspoon?
Yes, it does. And I don't understand why we would put a maximum percentage over what we have. That's like budgeting in a deficit.
Yeah, comment is well taken. This was how the information wound up being presented. And so in the interest of time and moving things forward, we decided to present this as is and then allow for that adjustment once we had gotten to an option.
Thank you.
One thing that's worth noting is on this one, under reoccurring revenue initiatives, it said 58% to 66%. However, when this was brought up previously by members, much of the reoccurring revenue was going to occur through economic development activity. However, in this presentation, they're only allocating 3% to actually do economic development. Or, well, if you add up development initiatives, project development, you're only at about 4 or 5%. So you're not allocating much to actually do the reoccurring revenue initiatives.
And that's where you can make up the 18% by reinvestment from the development in the project development. Okay.
Yes, those are well taken comments, because as you can see with these allocation plans, these are related to the full pot of money that is available in the reinvestment fund. At this point in time, these options do not account for any potential return that may come into the fund. We could move on to option C, please. The key thing to note here is that there's a little more even distribution among the individual line items here. And what seems to be, taking the largest shares of the allocation are children and youth education initiatives, followed by development initiatives and MWBE development initiatives.
As well as rent and mortgage assistance.
Yes.
Which just for the record, there are other sources of funding within the city and county that are already providing that.
Then if we could move on to option D. And again, here you'll see the main driver of allocation here, or the line item commanding the most of the allocation would be development initiatives. Then followed by MWBE development initiatives, followed by recurring revenue initiatives under community control, and followed by other wealth building initiatives. Next slide, please. So the last slide that I want to share is an average of each of the minimums and maximums across these four options. And so what you can see here is overall, there is a higher preference to see development initiatives as well as recurring revenue initiatives under community control. And then there's some clustering among some of the other items at the top.
Okay. With that, are there thoughts, reactions from members?
I just want to thank James and the URA team for putting together the different plans to be considered by committee members. Thank you for that time and energy.
You're most welcome.
And at some point, we'll be able to see how these percentages break down into dollars, right? Will we be budgeting? Will you all be budgeting in terms of dollar amounts that will be allocated to the different categories?
I believe that's the intent.
Yes. So of this 7 point whatever million, we would actually then take 3.9% if we were using this chart, and that would be allocated. But also just want to reiterate what James said, which is at the end of the day, it's not hard and fast. We're sort of adopting a model, but that model can also be fluid depending on what the needs of the community are.
I don't mean to keep harping, but so if, let's say, out of the 7 million, $1 million was allocated for the first year, for example, then we would take, let's say for the first one, Children and Youth Education Initiative, 5% of that $1 million would be the expense line item. 5% of that $1 million would be allocated for that year for Children and Youth Education Initiatives, for example. Is that how it's going to work?
Just a slight correction, that would be using this chart, that would be 3.94%.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I looked at administration. Sorry about that. So yes, so it would be 3.94% of $1 million would be earmarked for children and youth services.
That's correct.
Okay,
That-
depending
that
on
is
how much we
correct.
got per year.
That is correct. But what the committee had not determined yet, Richard, was how much of said amount you wanted to spend per year. That determination, and remember, correct me if I'm wrong, that determination has not been made yet.
3.94% to 7.16% is the range in which the committee has to work in to determine how much we're going to spend out of that first allocation. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
James, thank you so much for putting this together and giving us some options. Just a few thoughts here. One of the things we discussed was not duplicating services. And as I look at all the plans, there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that I would take from each one. I am concerned about the high amounts for rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and job placement programs that show up, I believe, in C and D, although I may like C and D, some of those plans, okay? But I'm concerned about the high amount being given to programs where we have programs already out there and basically duplicating those services with these funds. I would like to see these more used for sustainability and development, not duplicating other funds that people can get. Also, finally, I still cannot wrap my head and say yes around this other wealth building initiatives, particularly at a 5% amount. That seems awfully high for just a pot of money that sits there that has no allocation, no purpose, and to be used at will. I understand what we said other wealth building initiatives were. I did hear you on that, but that did not sell me. I agree with the reoccurring revenue initiatives as it was placed in the chat from my understanding. But that other wealth building initiatives causes a little bit of concern, because how's that any different than some of the other project development initiatives, some of the things that are already on the list? And how do we determine what qualifications criteria just for that when we have those items already on the list? So I just need to go on record as saying I'm not in favor of that additional line of other wealth building initiatives and that large amount for an empty pot there, or a pot that's just for dipping with no criteria. Thank you, guys.
I agree, Alicia, that, that is sort of like a vague line item. I would, when you think of wealth building, you think of things like home ownership, business development, and things like that. And maybe that allocation, that 5%, could be divvied up amongst those initiatives. I mean, when you think of wealth building, the easiest way is through home ownership and business development and business ownership. So maybe those items could be increased by that 5%, divvied up between those kinds of things that are more specific.
Also, as a point of notes and going back over that, children and youth education initiatives, we're leaving out the social initiatives too that exist, particularly within some of our faith-based areas that may need some help down the road. And we called it, I have it listed as education and social initiatives, because technically there are only like 3 education groups left in this Hill District. And to my knowledge, only 2 of us are registered as real education with MOUs, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of great work being done that needs to be sustained, as well as some new ideas that are coming down the pipe. So I wouldn't want it to just be education initiatives, to say education and social, because we're dealing with all kinds of things, children and youth right now. as a result of that, if I had to look at all the plans that are before me, I did make notes, which is a good thing. I would do a little bit of this and a little bit of that with option C. I would definitely lower the rent assistance, mortgage assistance, job placement programs, because those already exist. And at the same time, I would take totally out and agree with Richard on the, just take that out and divvy that money up. Also, workforce development initiatives seem kind of high in duplication of programs we already have here. Project development seemed a little low to me because project development is what we're kind of seeking. And even with our funding and reoccurring revenues, it seems like we need a little more of that part. But I'm just going to kind of end it there. But those are my thoughts.
So with that being said, Ms. George, is there one that you sort of favor over the others, that even though you would make sort of slight adjustments, is there one option that you prefer over the others?
The one I would favor the most would be option C without the other wealth building initiatives. And I would use option C. I'd lower those others. I don't have a calculator in front of me. I'm sorry, Daniel.
That's okay.
I don't know how it all adds up. But for instance, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, I would put those at a lower amount, definitely. Maybe that's 1.88, maybe it's 2. Same thing with job placement. I would bring workforce development initiatives up to, I'd give that probably 2.5. I'd probably take a little bit down on that one. The development initiatives are really high on option D, and I do believe they should be high. Because that's kind of at the root of what we're trying to do here, I guess. So I'd probably bring that up to about 10-15%. Project development, 2%. I'm just throwing this out without a calculator, guys. Also, MWBE counseling initiatives, I'd put something there because we will need to support any counseling activities. Right now, to my knowledge, we have 2 in the Hill, 1 in the Hill District, primarily. And it wouldn't hurt to have another one if it comes through. And I'd lessen Hill District, the preservation, and make that like 2% because we do have other programs for that. That's kind of where my head is. I'm sorry, I don't have a calculator in front to really see whether that equals out or not, but that would be my thought. Even if it means taking the children and youth education and social initiatives down to 10% or 9%. Obviously, I'm big on keeping that at 11 because I do see that as a need and finding a place in places. So projects, development, all of that works hand in hand for me.
Yeah, one area I see on this listing that I think has really needs some work or needs some attention is under business counseling initiatives. My firsthand knowledge of working with small businesses in the area, we do a lot of counseling with our small businesses in terms of directing them on how to operate their business and how to stay on the straight and narrow in terms of being responsible. And it's a lot of work. I mean, we have maybe 80 small businesses with lines of credit with us, and we have to counsel half of them on a regular basis. So that there's definitely a substantial need in that area, and I would request that there be more effort or more allocation towards that end.
James, I'd like to jump in here. Thank you for moving that slide to the minimum versus maximum allocation or minimum and maximum allocation. A couple things I'd like to point out. One, I definitely think that the administration should, be closer to the minimum amount, just because, there are more resources there to support the work than not. I just think that 10% is getting a little high, given all of the other sources of funding that are available to the agency, specifically URA. So that would be my point on administration. With all due respect to all of you all's work, thank you for that. The children and youth initiatives, I understand what Alicia is saying, and certainly empathize with it. I think we can point to, a number of sources for all of these pools that we have outlined here. I think the question is what will it take to create impact? I think for me, that is welcome, Elaine. What I am thinking is, what will it really take to create impact? And so I'm going to point out specifically that for the project development and development allocation, if we just take the amount that is currently in play for the contribution for the FMB site, or Block C1 and G4 to be more specific, which is 7.5 million. If we were to take on option C, it says something like 16% or 15% for development initiatives. We would essentially be talking about $1.2 million, right? Which, just from a development standpoint, and given that the impetus of the fund was to ensure the redevelopment of our community, not necessarily purely from a bricks and mortar standpoint, but certainly looking at it through that lens first and foremost, based on the genesis of this process, I would argue that that is just simply not a substantial enough amount to have impact. And so some things just happen to cost more than others. Development is one of those things that costs more. And so I want us to be mindful as we think about this, at what point does the funding that we are allocating become negligible? So that's for consideration. Relative to the institutional preservation section, I would argue that there is not sufficient funding for that particular category. I know that the churches, when we went through this process, and specifically I'm talking about the Hill CDC, when we met with over 20 stakeholders over a span of many, many weeks, one of the things that we heard was that a lot of the churches don't have a pool of resources that they can easily access funding from. And that is obviously because they're a faith-based organization. They may not be able to access some of the private philanthropy as easily. They certainly can't access government dollars as easily. And so that came up as a point of concern. So I just want to make sure that I punctuate that the Historic Hill Institutional Preservation Fund was really focused on some of those historic institutions that simply don't have other pools of funding to pull from. I think that from the MBE counseling standpoint, there is extensive funding available through some of the small business development centers, some of the other organizations that provide this work, Riverside Center for Innovation, Hill CDC provides these services. There are just a lot of services out there. Bernard Alexander's, I believe it's called the E3 Alliance. Forgive me if I didn't get that correct. There are a lot of resources currently being made available to small businesses, and I want to from a counseling standpoint. I don't know that we are best served committing 1.91. I mean, on the higher end. I mean, I can get my head around that, but I just want to make sure that we're not putting money where it's already available. I do think that from a workforce development standpoint, it would be worth maybe having some conversations with Partner for Work and some of the other workforce development agencies out here to see if there are gaps in the workforce development funding pool right now or not. I don't know the answer to that, but certainly there are some folks who could bring some perspective there. Again, job placement programs, are we duplicating services? Are we going to be able, even if we were to fund, I'm just thinking, like, under what circumstances would we fund a program at 4.03? Again, thinking of impact. If we're funding it at 4.03 of the current allocation, what is that? That's 7.0453. I mean, that is substantial. That's $339. I could probably pay for some staff support to support some of the efforts to get folks in different jobs. But at any rate, again, I think duplication is going to be key here. We've got to nail down and come to a conclusion on what we want to do. But I do ask for us to look at this through a lens of where can we be impactful with the funding that we have available to us here. Thank you.
So before you go, Marimba, of all these slides, A, B, C, D, and even this sort of the average of all of them, is there one that sort of speaks to you more than the others? And then you could sort of account for adjustments from there?
Or actually like this one. That's why I spoke up at this point. I like the I could get my head around the maximum numbers here. I know they're a little too high, 125%. So we'd have to reduce some things, which I would go towards those things where there's duplication and reduce them by, whatever amount we can. Can you go back, James, please?
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Councilman.
No. So the reason why I asked is based on your comments, based on sort of what I heard from Alicia, I actually thought the very last one, which is the average of them all, made the most sense so far. And listening to your comments and even to Ms. George's, my thinking would be sort of start working from the maximum percentage version of this and back your way down. So you could lower the 7.6 for children youth education initiatives as an example, and you could put a portion of that into project development. You could take some of the high levels of subsidy that are in there, and again, spread them out to some of the areas where you all mentioned you have sort of greater concerns. So you could give some of that to historical institutional preservation. So in my mind, as I'm listening to everyone, and just based upon my own personal preference, I would start with the maximum percentage here, and then adjust from there to get to something where the majority would actually have an agreement.
Right.
Did you start with the larger ones first, like the 30%, 15%, start with those, see how far you can scale those back? Because the objective would be, I think, to get to 100%. That way, you'll have a, zero-based budget there. You know that you're going to spend all that you get. And because, to chip away at the smaller ones would be less effective, huh?
This is Reverend Grayson. I think I've kind of not chimed in, but I think the word Marimba said best in terms of most impact. And so I think sometimes if people can see impact, the huff and puff won't be so bad, that we just try to say, look at the impact on these projects. And so, Richard, I don't know if I would necessarily cut back on the higher percentages versus looking at some that are duplicated or can be moved in other areas as less percentage. But if the impact more on those areas that can be impactful, then I think I would stay there, personally.
Yep.
So I just,
with the big focus being on duplication of services.
yeah, that's how I would attack it. Anything that we know, and it's going to be hard because, we all, all of the areas are impactful, but I guess the question is, what's the most impact we could make? So at the end of the day, as we look at these funds, that we can kind of tangibly see some impact, especially around development, and the institutions that have been the staples. Again, there are not a lot of funding for the faith-based piece, but there's a lot of other kind of duplications that I would look more at, kind of tweaking those versus the impact of the others.
I agree. I have a suggestion. Thank you for that, Reverend Grayson. I have a suggestion. There didn't seem to be a lot of support around the ambiguity of other wealth building initiatives. I would suggest that we reduce that to 2%, which would be approximately, if we're looking at the current budget, right? The 7.5. Now, keep in mind that the block G1 and G4 in some ways may be the largest allocation we get on any given site. So because of the density and scale of that particular development. So we should keep in mind that future payments may not come close to that. I don't know the total budget right now for Block E, which is the next proposal that the Lower Hill Development Team is proposing to take through. We should do the math on that, Councilman. If you have that number, or if the URA has that number, it would be helpful to have that.
I've asked for it. We don't have it yet. The team is supposed to give me an estimate, but I don't have it yet.
It would be helpful knowing that. Are they planning to pay that up front in full?
So I believe they're legally obligated to. I think one thing we have to sort of think through is, does it make sense? Because again, once you, and I don't remember the number, so forgive me. So for the tower, let's just say we were going to get 9 million over 10 years.
Right.
To monetize it up front, you're now getting 7 million over 2 years. Well, the parking garage is not going to be, it's probably not going to be barely half that, right? For various reasons. So do you want, again, using rough numbers, do you want 5 million over 10 years? Do you want to monetize it and get 2 million now? That's the sort of, and which is why I've asked for the numbers so that we could then have a knowledgeable conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that'd be a good conversation for the future, for a future agenda. And obviously I would expect that they will be delivering all of that prior to trying to advance their plan. But with that said, I think that the wealth building I would be comfortable with, and everyone else should make comment on this. If we were to take the existing amount that's been committed, not necessarily deposited just yet, but the 7.5 million, and take that down to 2%, we're talking about $150,000, right? For a relatively ambiguous category, I could see that being a decent amount of money to support either a staff person somewhere, or a special project, or a fair of something of that nature. 150 is nothing to sneeze at for this initial allocation. So I would propose that would get us at least down to the teens by taking 8 or so % off of wealth building initiatives that are ambiguous, when we have a number of other wealth building initiatives here that are very clear. That's one suggestion.
I agree, Marimba.
So do I.
Sorry, I was muted and didn't realize that. I agree, Marimba. Dan, I just want clarification here. This screen that we're on right now is the one you're saying you're in keeping with, and it seems like it is the best, but if so, that'd be what, option E to take from here?
Yes, it would be.
I guess it would.
Okay.
option E.
We're creating the other option. I just want to be sure, because I didn't include this when I was speaking, but I did base change in option C, which kind of works out to this new option we're making here. So I could live with, if this becomes an option, I can live with that. And just tweaking some of these numbers. I agree with Marimba about development needs to be a little higher. I do, I can live with the minimums. I'm sorry, I got a lot going on here in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I can live with the minimums with MWBE, both the development initiatives and the counseling. I can live with that. I do think the 7.17 is a little high, but I do agree with Richard. Let's divvy it up And again, I just don't understand that wealth building initiatives one, and I think it should be gone and we should allocate those monies to where they can go right on this chart. But I do like this chart the best if it's an option.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alicia. I think for the, I don't remember exactly all of the detail of why MWBE development initiatives was separate and apart from development initiatives. But I think for that reason, I think for that reason, I also could live with the minimum on that. I think that because development initiatives aren't just carried out by quote unquote MWBEs, obviously we have nonprofit developers as well, many of whom are doing a lot of work within the Hill District. So I want to just bring that to our attention. I'm not quite sure what that delineation was other than MWBE development initiatives, but so I could get my head around that. But again, I also think that, you know, the business counseling initiatives, I mean, if somebody could give me an example of, you know, where there's a gap in the market for these services, I would appreciate it personally. And maybe it's not now, maybe there will be some in the future. I can't speak to that.
I think that the churches struggle a bit in terms of fundraising and being able to carry.
Reverend Gray. I know this is strange math, but we look at.
You're breaking up, Reverend Grayson.
If we look at potentially.
Go ahead, Richard, finish. We'll ask Reverend Grayson to.
The churches are doing a lot of program work and a lot of development initiatives inside their walls, but because of fundraising ability in terms of how foundations and other entities are reluctant to give support to churches, I think that by us, if we're able to help churches with initiatives, development initiatives inside their congregations, I think that could be a good allocation, you know, for development from us. We will be helping our own, so to speak, because they do struggle with fundraising, and they do have some substantial initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. On mortgage assistance and rent assistance subsidy, do we have an update from the URA on availability of funding for HOF? Is it oversubscribed for the Hill District neighborhood? Excuse me, HOF is Housing Opportunity Fund.
Marimba, I can look into that and get back to you. I don't have the answer right now.
Okay, I would appreciate just having a sense of how many applicants you're getting from 15219, 15213, specifically the Hill District portion of 15213. And I'd like to know if we're getting lots of applications for rent assistance or mortgage assistance from those zip codes. That'd be really helpful. I mean, we want to obviously help and ensure that there's sufficient support, but if there's not already sufficient demand that's going into available funding, we should think about whether or not that's the proper allocation right now.
I have a question. Now, it appears that this chart here is the one that we're all in agreement with, that we prefer, especially on the maximum percentage column. Would it be our objective to get that percentage down to 100%? Is that a part of our strategy?
That would need to be a next step. I would leave it to the committee to determine what that looks like in terms of final percentages assigned to each line item. But but functionally speaking, yes, in order for this to actually make the sense that it needs to, the adjustment to 100% is needed.
Okay, so in terms of next steps, I think that, I think we have quorum here, is that correct?
Yes.
Let me double check.
Okay. Is Councilman Lavelle still on? I would
Clear.
suggest, okay, I would suggest that we move to do a preliminary acceptance of this allocation model with a final recommendation of the URA to come back with a 100% grand total under shifting between minimum and maximum percentages, taking into consideration what has been discussed today. That would be my suggestion in terms of next steps.
Can you say that as a motion?
Or call for a motion,
Sure.
Chair.
I move to have the URA to take the feedback that was discussed today, utilizing the average minimum and maximum allocation chart that's already been developed as the basis of future work, with the goal of getting the grand total to a 100% model by shifting between minimum and maximum percentages and coming back with a recommendation for approval. And hopefully we can get that back sometime in the next week to 2 weeks for final approval by way of email.
And that is based off of our new slide E, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Affirmative recommendation. With that, that takes us to other business. I do have one thing that came to my mind as we were doing roll call. State Representative Jake Wheatley is no longer State Representative Jake Wheatley. There are now 2 state reps that actually represent the Hill District. And I believe it would then become appropriate for us to now extend the invitation to both of those offices to also join this committee. Or have a representative of their office join this committee that would also be non-voting.
Is this a call for a motion on that?
Yes.
I motion to extend the offer to the current representatives to stand on this board.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. I work with the URA to formally do that. Is there any other business for us?
I think just the welcome, Majestic, good to see you. I just wanted to see if there was what the status of Mr. Lane's appointment. Is it current? Is it outstanding relative to the new administration or the former administration? We weren't updated on that, so I just want to be updated on where we stand there, given your comments.
So don't quote me. My understanding is it's current, but I will speak with the new administration to confirm that.
Okay. And if that is the case, we should update the protocol accordingly.
Yep.
Just a little clarity for the expediency of this changing it to 100%. I heard you say, Marimba, no more than 2 weeks. How can we hold ourselves accountable with the urgency of people asking how soon should 2 weeks, and when can the committee come together and get to the 100%?
Great
Mr.
question,
Reed,
Reverend. Go ahead.
is 2 weeks enough time for you to turn around a new chart?
That is going to depend on the level of detail that is required in considering where there may be duplicative services, knowing that that was one of the charges from the committee to evaluate, to ensure that we're not having duplicative services. I myself don't have that research right now, so to the extent that, you know, that charge is required, it may require additional time. That being said, a cursory adjustment to 100% based on the feedback that we've heard, that can certainly be done within a week.
Okay.
James, I would say let's do the cursory review and revisions.
Agreed. And I also think if it's helpful to you, James, both myself and Prime Marimba can probably jump on a call for 10, 15 minutes to talk about the duplicative, because I know most of that within my mind.
Okay. Well, let's arrange for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order?
In terms of other business, I just want to bring up that we still have a need to actually develop the application and provide feedback, I think, on some early stage application recommendations. But I think that we need to make sure we nail that down for the next agenda.
Okay.
Okay, and in that application, we'll include, you know, different requirements what they have to provide in order to, just like you would with a grant application, right? Is that going to be a part of it?
Yeah.
Yes.
We do have a draft application. Would you like me to send that out with the next, with the next agenda when it's time to meet, so people have time to review it and we can make changes as we move forward?
Yes.
Yeah.
When we send out the adjusted chart, we should send the application with it and ask for members to review it in advance of the meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilman, before we close out, Reverend Grayson, I do want to get back to your specific question. I would recommend that when we receive the updated chart from James, that those who are on the line in particular take it upon themselves to respond within 48 hours. I would right now ask that we empower them to call for a motion from one of the chairs to formally accept in their email so that we can keep that going and moving forward. But it's going to be incumbent upon those who are on the line today to ensure that we get those votes in. Otherwise, we won't have quorum.
Well, how about the individuals that aren't on the call? They're not aware of what we came up with.
They can review. They can review they can review the Zoom meeting and have input. I mean,
Okay.
I'm tired of going to too many meetings where they ask when, and so the push for me is no more when. Let's make it happen. So the expediency of 1 week, tweak it, respond 48 hours. Let's make it happen that week, and let's look at the application. Let's try to be more proactive than soon.
Agreed. And maybe in the when you put it out there, the new allocation, all that, and for those that weren't on the meeting, you may want to put in there for them to refer to the Zoom meeting for background.
Yep.
Noted.
Thank you. I'd also like to note that the staff member who posts these videos is on bereavement until Monday, so the video won't be posted until Monday. Just FYI.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks for the notification.
Is there anything else? If not, thank you all for getting through this today. Much appreciated. Let's have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Good day.